Once you can identify that mindset where people are willing to invest ahead of the curve and solve the problems of tomorrow today, then it starts to really become a much more interesting dialogue.
Welcome to the Fractional Edge podcast, the ultimate podcast where we unlock the power of workforce planning and discuss the rapidly growing fractional executive staffing strategies to supercharge your business.
Meet your hosts, Fraser, a workforce planning expert, Fractional Chief Human Resources Officer, and founder of C4 Talent.
And Jason Huett, the sensei of marketing, Fractional Chief Marketing Officer, and founder of Fifth Degree Marketing.
We'll bring you insights from seasoned pros, inspiring success stories, and actionable strategies to optimize your valued workforce.
Don't miss this chance to upgrade your business with top industry leaders in today's competitive landscape. So tune in and learn how to unleash your competitive edge. Welcome, everyone, to the Fractional Edge podcast. I am Carol Fraser, Fractional Chief Human Resources Officer. With me today is my co-host, Jason Huett, Fractional Chief Marketing Officer. And today, our guest is Paul Burani. He is a Fractional Chief Revenue Officer. Paul, introduce yourself. Tell the audience who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Carol and Jason. So my name is Paul Burani. I'm the founder of Mission Flywheel. So we consult with mission-driven organizations focused on social impact, and really just partner with founders of these organizations to help them generate repeatable outcomes. So anywhere in the revenue organization, your sales team, your BD operation, your marketing programs, or even just the underlying operations of all of that, there is an opportunity to really kind of get the house in order. And that's where we come in and try to help people sort of prioritize and execute. So I'm based in New York. I have about 20 plus years of sales and marketing background. Started as a agency founder and worked in the media and advertising space for a long time. Spent a number of years at Google doing global partnerships with our automaker clients. And at some point, I decided I wanted a complete pivot in my career, and I got into social impact work, mostly in the EdTech space. And there's so much interesting work happening in education. Specifically, my focus was on connecting underrepresented communities to desirable middle-class job opportunities in technology. So once I had a taste for that kind of work and the impact and the joy that you feel when you actually help people and can see the impact you make, I was hooked, and I said, I want to keep doing this for the rest of my career.
So I got to jump in. I'm just chomping at the bit here because, so Paul, he's got a background in marketing, obviously revenue, but you also, I want to get the backstory. So EdTech, I'm especially interested to hear a little bit more about that. I worked in EdTech for a short period of time, but could you maybe just dive into your experience in that industry?
Yeah, so I made a couple of stops in that space, and EdTech is really broadly defined, right? I mean, you could slap a technology label on anything, and it changes, the entire picture. Where I was coming in was really with workforce training. So I started at a company called Udacity. Udacity is a big workforce trainer, kind of like, a competitor to Coursera and General Assembly and Udemy and some of those. And Udacity was, had a good, solid consumer business selling this, sort of alternative learning solution to the end user directly. There was a thriving enterprise business, and then government was really going to be the third leg of the stool. And so I came in to stand up government partnerships. We did the first deal with the Department of Labor to get workforce funding, specifically COVID relief funding for dislocated workers in the middle of the pandemic. And so people that were out of work were able to tap into free opportunities, and they got trained in UX design, they got trained in digital marketing or business analytics, and it was really cool. Later on, we did that with economic development as well, and tapping into ARPA funding. So as you know, there's so much money out there, to connect the pipelines and get talent into these desirable career pathways. The technology aspect of it really was, in this case, the way that the learning was being delivered. So no classroom, no professor in the blazer, no office hours, no Apple for the teacher and all that fun stuff. It was really just log in, do it on your own time, do it around your other commitments, and make it work with your lifestyle. So I made a few other stops in this industry. I worked at Catalyte, which is really kind of coming more from a staffing perspective. The hire, train, deploy model that's starting to gain some traction in the staffing world. We launched some products there and really kind of connected underrepresented communities to jobs in Fortune 1000 companies. And most recently, a Tech Elevator, which is a coding boot camp, where I was running the enterprise business. So didn't get the pleasure of doing the government deals there, but what we were doing really was taking this boot camp infrastructure, which was training 1,200 students a year with no technical background, getting them into software developer roles. And I was offering that. My team was really bringing it to corporations and saying, let's make this an OS for all of your internal mobility. So you can power your reskilling programs with Tech Elevator, and that's going to help you get access to diverse talent you wouldn't otherwise get. It was, really powering a lot of those DE&I programs, and also really a good offering for mobility, right? When you're just trying to find ways to keep good people in your organization rather than let them leave. So technology, broadly defined, really at the core of everything, but at the end of the day, it was also about people.
I don't know that I've ever heard someone say government and pleasure in the same sentence. I don't know too many people that have that skill set or that enjoy that skill set. It's a bit of a specialty.
Yeah. Well, you listen to me long enough, Jason, there'll be a number of firsts in this conversation.
Can't wait.
So, Paul, when your corporation now, which is Mission Flywheel, as a fractional chief revenue officer, how do you partner with clients? What is it that you're bringing to them? What is the added value? How are you helping their mission move forward when you go and partner with them as a chief revenue officer?
Well, I'll give you two versions of that answer. In very practical terms, Carol, there's kind of a top-down and a bottom-up model. The top-down is really the pure fractional model where an organization might say, all right, look, we're growing fast and we need some help in our revenue organization. And maybe we don't want to wait until we've got 60 or 80 people on board to make that C-level hire at the top of the revenue organization. We've got 10 people today, but we can see that we need to make these investments and set the table for what's coming maybe 18 months from now. And so that's a sort of a classic definition of a fractional, right? Where they know what they want out of a CRO, and they'll say, let's take it slow. Let's do it 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever it might be. Yeah. Now, in an effort to be flexible and easy to buy and a real client partner, I think what we've also done is offered a bottom-up, more consulting-based model, whereby it's more project-derived, and it might start with a very simple problem. For example, they might say, look, we're capturing a lot of data about customer needs, and we're not really doing the CRM thing right. So what we'd love to do is get a roadmap for which platform to invest in, how to actually get data into it, how to make it useful, and really set the table now, because if we do it right now, we won't have headaches 12, 24 months from now. Another example might be, hey, our sales team is getting a lot of first meetings and we're not getting a lot of second meetings. And so, we could go in and coach them and say, okay, well, what are the questions you asking? How are you building on these conversations? Do you even understand the personas you're in front of? Are you talking too much, right? Like, these are a lot of different ways that we could look at it. But if I was to step back and think about your question more abstractly, Carol, I would say organizations that are mission-driven generally start with a big idea. And that idea alone is usually enough to get some angel investment, maybe a couple of people on board. And at some point, the drivers of growth are going to be much more concrete. You need to go to a fund and raise that next round. And whoever's got the purse strings on a 7-figure raise is going to be asking for proof, right? They're going to be asking for outcomes. So you validate your mission with those outcomes. If you're in education, maybe it's your graduation rate, maybe it's your job placement. If you're in healthcare, maybe it's the ability to sort of control symptoms, or the ability to increase the penetration of alternative methods of care. There's a number of ways that it could be measured, but at the end of the day, we need to show that we can validate the mission with outcomes and we can do it repeatably over and over again. So that's how we help.
That is excellent. I love that, the way that you kind of explain the top down and bottom up. I think that in the world of fractionals right now, being such a new way of handling workforce planning as an opportunity to bring in part-time executives to really help move the needle, and knowing that there's more than one way to skin a cat. You can bring me in for 1 or 2 days a week as the top dog, or you can have me come in and really focus it on a project, which could require way more hours just to get that foundation set, so that the rest of it is a whole lot easier. So I really like how you explain that. And of course, the mission component is so, I think, is just amazing, because where we're going just societally, we need more things that are mission driven and less about, the typical almighty dollar. But you need the dollar to fulfill that mission, which is why your role is so important. So, when you think about those things around workforce planning and fractional in general, I would just love to get your opinion, your ideas, especially because you were almost in that HR space, if you will, from an L&D perspective. So you're not unfamiliar with the terminology around workforce planning. How do you see the fractional executive helping impact small and medium-sized businesses as an alternative, if not the best alternative, to their workforce planning challenges?
That's a great question. So I think, to your point, and sort of build on your point, I'm not really one that has formal HR training or a background in organizational development, but I've hired and managed and coached a lot of people. And I've sold training solutions, right? So that's what sort of guides my thinking about it. And I really just boil it down to the value of human capital. I know that sometimes that's a bit of a polarizing term. Some people think it's a little crass to talk about people as human capital, but I'm doing it deliberately because this is generally the largest line item in any organization's operating budget. So if you're going to compare it apples to apples with other assets, well, you want to be doing that in order to give it the importance it deserves. And so you get a sense of how important that planning function is. We write business plans, we write budget plans, and we plan our inventory and everything that's on the shelf. So why wouldn't we have a similar planning function for the most valuable asset in the company, right? And so people are unpredictable. The business is unpredictable, especially if you're talking about early stages. And so I always think of that quote from JFK. It's not one of his most famous quotes, but he said that the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. I think that the fractional model is by definition a proactive mindset. For an executive to hire a fractional, it's basically because they're saying, today I don't need one, but I will tomorrow, and I'm willing to invest in a fraction of that one to get there. And so I think once you can identify that mindset where people are willing to invest ahead of the curve and solve the problems of tomorrow today, then it starts to really become a much more interesting dialogue. Carol, I'm sure you've seen many versions of this in your own experience.
I have to say, Paul, I am going to make sure that I put your little thing right there, and I'm going to put it in my phone, and I'm just going to play that for people. You want to know why you need a fractional person? Because you need to be proactive. The reactive means that you are behind the 8 ball. You are jumping at somebody who is most qualified, as opposed to being proactive and finding the person who is qualified and can honestly take whatever that function is to the next level. So, I think that, as you put it, the proactive side of it, it is definitely changing the way that founders, owners, CEOs, VCs, whoever is really thinking about this, to be in that proactive mindset and to recognize that there are people, all of these fractional executives with years of experience, skills, knowledge, expertise, and you can get that into your organization and actually get ahead of your competitor who maybe doesn't see fractional executives as the answer to the future. So I really do appreciate appreciate that answer so much. Well, do you have any success stories with your clients from your fractional work?
Well, I'd like to think everything we do is a success, right? But that's not, of course, the accurate reality. I think of it, where there isn't a success, it's a learning experience, and that is also, one form of success. I think that, one of my favorite projects right now has been with a company that is doing residential solar installations in sub-Saharan Africa. And they're focused on specifically impoverished urban communities. And so, we're looking at a situation where most of the territory in which we work is that sort of archetype of a community where people are living on a few dollars a day, something that for all of us and probably all of your listeners, we've heard it, but it's pretty hard to actually imagine what that is like. So these people are, they don't have the resources that we have in the developed world, but they are digitally connected, and that is an important driver for my client, because what we're doing is trying to offset a major financial problem of theirs. They spend about 40 to 50% of their disposable income on really dirty, inefficient fossil fuel power. And they do it not so much to keep the lights on or to run the dishwasher or whatever it might be. They're doing it to power their mobile phone so that they can remain digitally connected, because next to food, water, and air, that's pretty much the most important thing, right? So the solution is really a combination of clean tech and fintech, where it's about making affordable solar available to these people, but it's also about making the terms of ownership palatable to somebody that's living on a few bucks a day. And so the actual functional challenge is a really interesting one. They have a reseller network of hundreds of people that are basically just roaming the neighborhoods, probably, got a half dozen different side hustles. And they need to really kind of establish some tight guardrails around the guidelines for this reseller network to operate. How do you accurately represent the company and the product? How do you make promises you can keep? How do you actually present, a high standard of customer service? So I'm writing this playbook for them, which is going to be rolled out. They've got very aggressive sales targets. They're working with the World Bank on a major funding opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunity for exposure, not just the funding, but also, getting some eyeballs on the mission. And that's what I love, is when you see the impact, but then you also have a chance to blow it wide open and give the rest of the world a peek at what you're doing.
I love this, Paul. I can sense your passion and what you do. It's very clear. I'm curious. We have a lot of CEOs and entrepreneurs that listen to our show, and what advice can you give them for beginning to work with a CRO? Can you share some tips?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, we've touched on this a little bit, but you got to consider the opportunity cost of inaction, right? It's very easy to look at a proposal, to fast forward to the dollar figure and say, okay, either it's in the budget or it's not. Well, by definition, budgets really look at the money you have, not the money you stand to lose if you don't do something, right? You don't make that hire, you don't explore that new market or invest in that technology. Well, what's the number that's not going to show up on your balance sheet as a result of inaction? That's why I always ask a prospect, one of my favorite questions when we were getting to know each other is, if you had a $1 million slush fund to do anything at all today, how would you spend it? It's a great question. It's a great conversation starter. I always learn a lot. So another thing that I would say is to just make sure to sweat the details, because, I've written plenty of visionary strategy decks. We all know what those look like. We all know that they're important, but in a sales or a marketing organization, the wheels fall off really quickly if you drop the ball on details, right? If you're a chief product officer, by comparison, right, those cycles turn a lot slower. And it's not to say that there isn't the same magnitude of effect, But if you say the wrong thing in front of a prospective client or in a public forum, you misrepresent your company or your product, you can actually do really quick damage. And so what I would say is, at the risk of losing face publicly in a sales and marketing organization that is on the front lines, avoid that harm by sweating the details.
And fantastic. And let's go back to that $1 million slush fund question. I'm curious, do you see any consistency in the responses to that question?
I wish I did. I rack my brain to look for patterns. And I wish the pattern was, we need a fractional CRO to come in who's, mission driven. And but in lieu of that, what I'm finding is two kinds of answers. The really conservative answers where you can tell that they're in probably some financial hardship and they're thinking, okay, well, actually, I need that $1 million to pay down these debts, dig myself out of this hole and do the things that I was supposed to be doing 12 months ago. And then there are the people who, pause and kind of stroke their chin for a second. And then they think, oh God, I'd love to start selling to a whole new customer. Or I'd love to add these 3 features to my product. Something, a little more visionary. In either scenario, you learn something, but it says a lot about the person, how they would spend that war chest.
Makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
That is very insightful. And given that so many people, regardless of whether they could get it or not, that $1 million question is so great because then any fractional, honestly, is like, if you had the resources, we will say $1 million, but if you had the resources to build XYZ, the marketing plan, the operations, the people function, that dream big moment, I think is really helps to kind of shift that mindset for these CEOs to be more proactive as opposed to that reactive. It's a great question. I really like that. So is there any myths that you think our listeners we should dispel for them about hiring a fractional executive?
Definitely. And probably not something you haven't heard before, but I would say, the main thing is the myth that somehow we're not as committed as a full-time employee. That's an easy one to rebut, though, because our level of commitment is not reflected in the hours we put in, but in the responsibility we take on. And so if you don't understand that as a client or as the person making the hiring decision, then at least we know we got to pull back and say, let's work on your definition of fractional, because by definition, if we are taking on all the responsibility of a C-level person, whatever function you're going to be leading, you're fully accountable to the results, to the people under you. And the fact that you're maybe only there 1 or 2 days a week is simply, it's the dollars and cents of, well, this is the investment you made in me. And so that doesn't mean that I'm not committed, right? Conversely, if you're hiring a consultant to solve a really specific problem for you, their scope is going to be constrained, right? And their influence on the rest of the team is going to be limited. And so you'd be right to say this person's not in it to win it in the same way. I think that's really the main one that, I think you try to nip that in the bud early.
And I think with the dedication is absolutely there. You're embedded. And I tend to find that many of these CEOs or founders think that they don't know what they don't know. So they think they need 40 hours to accomplish it. But yet when you bring in a fractional executive who has been there, done that, and you collectively know where the focus needs to be to achieve those results, then you can get there faster than if you were to try to save those dollars and hire maybe a level or 2 below. And it's the learning curve. At that point, they do need the 40 hours because it's the learning curve time, right?
Right.
So, Paul, I have to ask, I'm a marketing guy. And so you have an experience with agency. That's kind of how you started your career, it sounds like. And I'm just curious. So how do you interact with CMOs or marketing department? It sounds like you might be fairly hands-on just because of your experience, but I'm curious to know how your work intersects with marketing.
Yeah, well, definitely the tendency, Jason, is for me to be hands-on. It's how I'm wired, and for many years as a practitioner, you don't lose that muscle memory, right? That said, I also one thing I have lost is a very nuanced understanding of each and every little platform, and so that's where an expert like yourself, for example, could come in and say, "Well, look, if we're going to have a plan that includes these 4 channels going after these 3 audiences in this environment, et cetera, well, that's going to require a pretty granular knowledge of all the rules of engagement, which content plays well where, et cetera." And so, as a revenue leader, I think it's important that sales, BD, customer success, marketing, all of that is unified. And that's why a CRO title exists. It's important that there are pipes connected so that each knows what each other is doing and is planning in lockstep with one another. But ultimately, my own sort of personal point of view is know enough to be dangerous, always happy to bring in people that know more than I do about how to actually get the results.
I love it. I feel like we're getting a lot of great one-liners and quotes out of this. We're going to have to repurpose.
Seriously. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think if you could give 3 pieces of advice to our listeners, what might they be?
To our listeners, well, I think, one is to always look at these kind of flexible models with an open mind. Look at how much the world of work has changed in just the last few years, right? I mean, it took a global health crisis for us to realize that doing business over video is actually not so different in most contexts to being face-to-face. We had this technology in 2019, but we weren't using it this way. All of a sudden, we realized in most scenarios, it's actually more than adequate. And that's really sent some changes in the whole world of work. And it's actually birthed this whole notion of the future of work, right? Which is something that people weren't saying 4 years ago. So, open-mindedness about flexible models, part-time, full-time, advisor, consultant, fractional, there's just so many shades of gray nowadays. And that's not intended to be paralyzing. That's intended to be empowering, because as someone with limited resources, if you're in a growing business, you don't have to have this step function cost profile to every investment you make. You can take things a little bit more, with a little bit more nuance to what you need in that moment and be flexible. Let's see, other advice. I think the second one really concerns social impact, which is that we are rapidly becoming a global culture that I think is demanding more connectivity between missions and commercial goals. For any organization, whatever you choose to sell or whomever you sell it to. Look at Gen Z. Their numbers are off the charts in terms of ethical consumption, in terms of what they demand of the products they buy, as well as the employers they work for. That's really just leading the way. This isn't some nuance that applies only to, people born between such and such years. This is the world changing under our very eyes. And so I think that you don't have to be in renewable energy to contribute to saving the world. And you don't have to sound disingenuous. You can simply say, hey, look, we are a social enterprise and we support these causes. We donate X profits to this. We make an effort to hire people, and make the composition of our workforce look like the community we're in. Those are simple ones. The third one is not unique to me. It's not unique to your audience. But I would just say, be good people. I think we need reminders everywhere we go to just be kind to one another and nice and go easy on each other. And it's a rough world out there and it gets harsher every day. And so one more person joining the chorus, let's just be nice to each other.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah. Is there one question, Paul, that we didn't ask that you wish we did ask?
I think given my company's specific orientation to social impact, we're talking about workforce planning, and I know that human resources in general is a very outcomes driven type of a function, right? There's a lot of analytics. There's a lot of, just there's a lot of math that goes into how do you know if you're doing okay or good or great. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the outcomes that are associated with a healthy workforce planning function, how you measure success and you go from good to great.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So that kind of a question, and I would like both you and I, Paul, to kind of answer it from our own lenses and our experiences. It's difficult sometimes to define what does good look like. And I think many times, at least in my experiences with my clients, it's difficult because they haven't taken the time to align all of those metrics, the L&D metrics, the talent acquisition metrics, whatever that may be, to truly the business strategies and really better recognize how all of those things really line up or could line up or should line up to all of those inputs. I think you said it throughout this interview. The human capital, the people are what bring your mission, your product, your message out to the public. And without those people, you're kind of stuck, right? So when I think about fractional and I think about workforce planning and I think about the future of work, that middle section, which many people skip over, or at very best, they cursory do it, is around that whole career experience, right? It's about figuring out what does today look like, tomorrow, and the future, and then really having more strategic versus firefighting approach to finding the right talent, training the right talent, rewarding the right talent in the right methods, so that you're constantly moving them and the business to those end goals. I mean, Paul, your background in this kind of space of L&D within the kind of HR world, you are, and your whole product was around what those outputs could or should have been based on the career experience, based on the strategic plan of the company. What about you? How would you answer that question?
Well, I would answer it in a similar way, and this is really where the time that I spent in workforce and the time that I spent in marketing sort of converge, because I think that there is this growing awareness of the employer brand, right? And it's such an important one, right? I mean, if you work at Nestle, Nestle has 1 million global brands that are recognized in every corner of the earth. And that is what we typically think of, a recognizable product that makes a difference in my life. But what about my, driving a wedge between my home life and my work life? How does Nestle appear to me when I am a free agent on the job market and may want to, test, the waters of a career at a company like Nestle? Well, if Nestle has a strong employer brand powered by exactly what you're talking about, Carol, that the sort of career trajectory that people are on, the opportunities that are given to them, the sense of mobility and growth within an organization, then that brand is strong. And it won't take much convincing if a friend flags a job ID to me and says, you should apply to this. Or if I'm at a career fair, or if I just happen to see something, on a job board on LinkedIn or Indeed. But if that's not working, imagine the opportunity cost. Imagine if Nestle had a terrible, reputation for how it treated its people, which to my knowledge, it does not. So I don't want to speculate one way or another. But imagine if they did, right? How many very talented people would just never want to sign up for that mission that they're on. And when you look at it, when you go back to the idea that, human capital is the biggest budget item, so it's the thing they invest the most in, imagine if your raw materials for the thing you invest the most in is so heavily diluted because most of the people just didn't even come to the table except the ones that are desperate, right? Like now you're talking about a competitive disadvantage that's going to manifest far and wide over many, many years. And so it's like common currency to just stay competitive in business. And I think that's why you see that category leaders, doesn't matter what business you're in, category leaders at some point spend less time talking about how great their products are and more about their employer brand, because they realize that's the way to build a moat around their leadership position and stay number one.
That is brilliant. And everything that you'd mentioned around the attraction to your top talent is that component that most people skip, which is that career experience. And it's not about, hey, we've got this really awesome leadership development program, which we all should have, but whether or not there is growth opportunity. Because if you plan as a CEO to grow your business, de facto, you want to make sure you have a growth plan for the employees that are with you. That's how it's like a ripple effect. Everybody grows together. That was excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Paul, really great. I don't know if I've ever thought about employer brand. I'm not in the HR space, but I think that's a really interesting concept and one that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Paul, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about your company and about you?
Missionflywheel.com is our website. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Nowadays, more than a website and a LinkedIn, you don't really need a whole lot.
That sounds great. Well, we want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Fractional Edge podcast. Paul, it's been great having you, and be sure to hit the like button below. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and LinkedIn. You can also go to fractionaledge.com. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Fractional Edge. We hope you enjoyed our insightful discussions and feel inspired to unleash your competitive edge.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest episodes. You can also connect with our podcast guests to benefit from their expertise and explore collaboration opportunities by visiting our website, thefractionaledge.com. Join us next time as we continue to explore the power of workforce planning and fractional executives in today's competitive business landscape. Until then, take care and keep growing.